Hi, Fiona. It's Andrew here. How are you?
How are you, Fiona? It's Mark here also.
How are you doing?
Thanks for taking the time to speak to us today, Fiona. Obviously, there's a lot going on with developments in the environment that we're operating in at the moment. So we really appreciate you taking the time. I'm sure it's been an interesting few months for you. Perhaps you can tell the audience a little bit about yourself and Walker's Corporate Service Arm before we get into our discussion today.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. An interesting 6 months or 7 months, as you say, and one that none of us could be prepared for. But we've all survived, which is an incredibly positive sign for both businesses and us as individuals. So yeah, in terms of Walkers, I'm managing director of Walkers Professional Services. It's a corporate services team that's affiliated with Walkers, the law firm. Walkers is a global law firm. We have offices all across the world, including Cayman, Dubai, Hong Kong, Singapore, London, BVI, Jersey, Guernsey. And I'm sure I've left a few out, but people hopefully won't mind. In terms of Walkers Professional Services, we launched WPS, as we call it, 4.5 years ago in Dublin, and I came in to lead that team. We are very much focused on the financial services industry, focusing on SPVs and regulated funds. And on the SPV side, very much focused on structured finance and also heavily focused on aviation, given how much Ireland is a global hub for the aviation industry. Relatively uniquely in the market, we offer quite an integrated service offering, joining the legal, tax, listings, and corporate services all under one overall umbrella, which is just great for our clients in terms of providing a very joined up service. Here in Dublin, we have 26 people in the corporate services team, which is a mix of accounting, legal, COSEC, and tax professionals. And I'm very fortunate to have a super team around me and working closely with the law firm. We're servicing the industries I mentioned.
Thank you very much for that introduction. And I suppose just leading on from what my initial comment was, that it has been an interesting and challenging few months, and I think every person and business has had their own unique challenges. From a Walker's perspective, making that transition in kind of March and kind of staying through to now kind of October time, how have Walker's managed remotely over the last number of months?
I think we've done very well. I've been incredibly proud of how the team have adapted to working at home, often back with their family homes, outside Dublin or in, rented accommodation. I think everybody's done an exceptional job. We were quite well set up to begin with, in that the senior team in particular would have worked remotely a lot. So we're really fortunate that we had such a sophisticated IT support network, and in terms of everything was there to enable us to work remotely. There was obviously a few practical things that people might have needed help with, maybe laptops or second screens. Certainly as accountants, it's very difficult to work on Excel just on a laptop screen. It's very handy to have a second large screen to do the deep dive into the Excel sheets that we all know and love so well. But some practical things like that were very quickly sorted in mid to late March. But I think the team have done really, really well. It's obviously been challenging, but there's a lot of positives out of how people have dealt with it. We had rolled out an agile working policy within WPS. Obviously, the law firm had a well-established policy already, but actually within weeks we hit COVID, and what better way to test a policy than do it full time from home? So I think everybody's done very well. One of the things I've been most impressed by is not just the work, but how all the other things have managed to continue going. So our sports and social committee, we've had some really excellent seminars from our diversity and inclusion committee, a great one last week where we were fortunate to have some big name speakers like Jim Gavin and Niall Quinn. I know, impressive. And some really, 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 really interesting hour was to attend that session. Obviously, our CSR committee continued to be very active. We had a virtual Daffodil Day event earlier in lockdown, because we always would, invest a lot of energy in supporting that and the cancer charity. So it was good to see that we didn't just as a business focused on keeping the client service going, which is obviously key, but all of the other very important things that make Walkers who Walkers are, all of the stuff that makes us the team that we are. It's been great to see that continue.
So it sounds fantastic, Fiona, that obviously you guys have been quite innovative over the last couple of months, and I think hats off to you. I think you kind of have to be in this environment, coming up new ideas and new plans to make it more inclusive for people when they're working remotely. But I suppose in your role as MD, what has been your biggest takeaway over the last 6 or 7 months?
I think that people are very resilient, that people are very strong, that I have a super team around me. That's definitely been one of my biggest takeaways. I feel very, very fortunate for that. I never realized how much work I got done and how many questions I managed to answer by just walking around through the team in our open plan area. And in 15 minutes, just going from desk to desk, it was astonishing in hindsight how many things quickly got solved. And I'd say the same for the rest of my senior team. Obviously, that immediate chat and quick conversation is much more challenging to recreate in a remote environment. And I hadn't realized how much I would miss that. When you're working remotely, people think that their manager or their head of team or me maybe might be too busy to take a phone call, which is never the case. Whereas if you see me leaving my office and heading to the kitchen with a cup of tea in my hand, I'm obviously okay for time, and people stop me and ask me this, that, and the other. And as I said, the same applies not just to me, but to the various heads of the three teams within WPS. So I think that I hadn't anticipated, and to try and recreate that virtually is something I haven't quite cracked yet, but definitely I'm improving. I think face-to-face communication is so beneficial. Body language is so much part of how we communicate. And yes, we do Google Duo calls and Zoom calls and all the rest. It's not quite the same. I think the other takeaway I will have is people do work well from home, and certain roles work very well from home. And I think everybody needs to remember that this is not what flexible and agile working will look like, because this is everybody fully at home. And so any of the challenges could quickly be counteracted if people are in the office, say 3 days a week, and working from home 2 days. This is not what the future will be like. Obviously, considerably greater amount of flexibility will form part of how we all work going forward. And that can only be a positive. I've chatted to some people in some other firms on other industries totally unrelated to ours, and some are quite critical of remote working. But the challenge is to remember that full-time remote working is not what anyone really envisaged, or certainly the vast majority of people. So we can take all the good bits from this and kind of marry them with the good bits of us being in the office together a few days a week.
Certainly seems to be the popular consensus, I think, from people that we're speaking to, is that, when things do come back to, as you say, normal, that kind of 3 and 2 split, where 3 days in the office, you have your touch points with your colleagues, you get all the collaboration, innovation done, and then those 2 days from home to either reduce the commute or just to have some quiet time to get through your tasks, seems to be a popular outcome. And as you said, probably one of the big pluses to take away from this pandemic. When you look at,
I might just jump in though and add, one of the things we need to be very mindful of is training. And while remote working works very well for people who do their roles independently and have reached a level of independence in their role and technical and skill, need to be very mindful of counting trainees, COSEC trainees, any trainees or graduates, of making sure that they're getting the quality training experience that we got. And it doesn't really only apply to trainees. I mean, everybody's always learning at every level in their role, and there's no doubt about that. I'm still learning at the moment. But if you take your newly qualified accountants moving out of practice into industry, there's a huge amount that they have to learn, and there's a lot of value in, you pull up your chair there and we look at this spreadsheet together. So obviously we need to find new ways of doing that remotely, and we need to make sure that we've a couple of days that we are all touching base back in the office. And the challenge, I think, for the senior management team is, if your own team are in 2 or 3 days or 3 days a week, let's say, do you need to be in nearly every day so you catch everybody? And that kind of isn't great for the senior management team. They also need to have the agility and flexibility that other folks will have as well. So I think there's a lot to think about. I think absolutely we're not going to return to the 5 days a week in the office, but it does require some innovative thinking, really smart use of IT, how can you get that feeling of someone, sitting right beside you and pouring through a spreadsheet with you? How can you get that remotely? I think the IT tools are there. We just need to make sure we use them properly and are open to changing how we work so that we get back to where we were, but perhaps through a different route.
And certainly going to be for a lot of businesses and for people in your position to have to start thinking of these challenges and how to overcome them. And it'll be interesting to see the ideas that come out of that and how people do adopt the hybrid model. We're obviously talking quite a lot about how doing business internally has changed in terms of setting up remotely and engaging with colleagues. Externally, how have you seen business changed, or has it changed?
I think it has changed in some ways, and I think there are probably more changes to come. We've definitely used a lot less paper, which is very good for the environment. But it still surprises me how much original documentation is needed. There are still a number of documents under Irish law that are required to be executed with originals. A company seal needs to be affixed. The company's registration office is still heavily reliant on original documentation. So, if you take your typical incorporation paperwork, it needs, I think, 4 or 5 original signatures on it, and it's not 4 or 5 signatures of the same person. So that paperwork has to travel the city to be signed before it gets in original form to the company's registration office. So I think we do need to cut ourselves a little bit of slack. No one could have anticipated that we would end up, dealing with a pandemic like this. So I suspect when we return to whatever normality will look like, people will learn from that and maybe change processes. And I know the CRO are doing a big project at the moment, and I imagine they will continue that kind of changing approach towards original documentation. But it surprised me how many times I have been needed to come into the office to sign a piece of paper. It's not just the CRO. There's the Department of Foreign Affairs for the apostilling, notaries. These are all original documents that therefore can't just all be done remotely from home, wherever home may be in the country. I probably hadn't appreciated quite how much originals were needed. Now, we might have all defaulted to everything being originals in the past, and it's great to see that is significantly reduced. But there's still a way for us to go to get properly digital, and obviously a number of legal considerations around that in terms of things being validly executed.
Did you see that happening?
I imagine it will. I think we're all still dealing with the crisis, and changes to legislation or IT changes that accept digital signatures, that takes time and system investment, certainly on the IT side. And I think as an industry, as a country, as a firm in Walkers and my team in the corporate services side, I think we've all done incredibly well. Change doesn't happen overnight, but I do imagine that, much as we are rethinking what the office environment is like and what a typical working week is like in terms of location, I suspect a lot of those other things will be looked at as well when the crisis is over. Now, who knows when that may be, but it's hard to believe that we won't all learn and develop and change even more what we do as a result of this, and hopefully change it for the better. I think the other thing that I would say in terms of how has business changed, we do a huge amount of face-to-face board meetings. We would really get to know our funds directors very well. They are frequently in our offices. Obviously, everything now is done remotely, so the interpersonal relationships are not as strong if they started during this period. Obviously, those that were existing relationships beforehand can continue as they were, but that's definitely been something different. And again, some of those changes will probably keep going, in that maybe directors might dial in from outside Dublin through a video call in the future, yet from within Ireland.
And would that consist of a lot of international traveling as well?
So for board meetings, it would be a mix of people who are traveling from overseas and traveling within Ireland. And certainly under Irish, tax law, the directors need to mainly be, or certainly the majority of them need to be attending the board meeting from within Ireland. But in terms of travel, I didn't realize how much I would miss sitting in Dublin Airport at 5 or 6 a.m. in the morning to go to London for the day.
We've all done it.
Change of scenery.
Yeah, I cannot wait to get back to doing that. We've been quite innovative in terms of our marketing. We've done quite a lot of podcasts on technical updates and what we're seeing in the market, and kind of interviewing industry leaders. But cannot wait to be able to travel to London and pack in 5 or 6 meetings within a day. But in the meanwhile, business keeps going, and we keep winning new stuff, and we keep marketing, and we keep
Would that be a concern for you,
right
future,
by
though,
our
that
clients.
you don't have the opportunity potentially to strengthen those relationships with your new clients if you don't get to see them face to face?
No, I don't think so. I think clients fundamentally, the relationship is based on the quality of the work that you do, and that has always been done from here, and none of that changes. I think we will be back on the road. I just don't know when. And I don't think doing all this remotely or virtually is something that will continue.
So obviously we know, obviously Ireland is an international global hub for aircraft leasing, and obviously you mentioned yourself earlier for structured finance and regulated funds. Obviously it's been a tough year for the aviation sector, as we all know. But is there anything you're seeing in these areas, or what exactly are you seeing? I suppose, or any trends or?
So as I mentioned earlier, like aviation, structured finance, two key parts of our business. I won't rehash all that's in the well known and in the media. The challenges that's facing the aviation industry. That's obviously very well known. I will say though, in every recession and downturn, there are winners and losers, and there are players in the market who would have cash and who will have the ability to buy assets at low values. So there are always people who do very well out of a recession, and the key thing is to make sure that some of them are your clients. So I think we are seeing obviously a lot of lessee distress in the aviation space, inevitably, because the market is not really flying. We certainly are seeing in China a real increase in domestic travel. Golden Week was there recently, and there were, I believe, higher passenger numbers than there were in Golden Week last year. So in the domestic market, because there's such a significant domestic market in China, there's obviously good sparks of hope there, and that will eventually flow throughout the rest of the world. There's just the timing of it is uncertain. But I would say on the aviation space, yes, absolutely there are challenges, but with challenges come opportunity, particularly if you've solid relationships with your clients, and that or your clients know that they have a very high quality service provider that they have a well-established relationship with. So that's certainly what I would see on the aviation side. On the structured finance, in many ways, some common themes there. There are going to be clients who do very well, who in a distressed market, and that is their focus market. So they will have cash ready to move once the world starts to pick up again. So we're very fortunate in Walkers. Obviously, we're an international firm. We have a very, very high caliber, strong client base throughout our global network, and Dublin the same as well. So we've certainly seen a lot of activity in the structured finance space, and would expect that to continue.
Obviously, with business changing and so forth, like what would you say your clients have appreciated most during this time?
I think responsiveness and honesty. And I think that's probably what they appreciate at all times. Responsiveness is key. Deals still need to get done, documents need to get executed. We need to find a way to get companies incorporated quickly, and director signatures when director signatures are needed. So that level of responsiveness, we have really set ourselves a high bar within the team here to ensure that hasn't dipped as a result of COVID. I think certainly in late March into April, everybody in our market, and by that I would mean, I suppose, Europe and the US, because obviously Asia was a little ahead of us in terms of dealing with all of this, that everybody was dealing with, getting to grips with childcare, homeschooling, working from home. So everybody was quite tolerant of one another, because everyone was dealing with their own challenges. I think as the different jurisdictions go in and out of very high level lockdowns over the next number of months, because we won't all be in the same boat as our clients, we have to ensure that the client sees the same level of service, regardless of what's actually happening locally on the ground here in terms of a lockdown. But I have no hesitancies that we will be able to deliver on that. The team have been very responsive, taken huge ownership, and we've managed to continue that kind of high caliber service that we've provided. And honesty, I think it's very important to have a very honest relationship with the client. If there is a challenge about getting something done, for example, slower turnaround times in the DFA or the company's registration office, it's about giving them the heads up early on, managing it, giving them an update. always staying close and being honest, transparent, and doing right by your clients. I think that would be what I would say they've appreciated most on the service level side. As I mentioned earlier, we have been doing our own podcasts. There's a We Talk ABS podcast focused on the structured finance market, but a number of the other teams across the law firm have been doing podcasts as well in their own respective kind of practice areas. I think clients are appreciating the market insight, the technical updates, the fact that we have made an effort to continue to engage with them as we would virtually, I suppose, instead of in person, and that we continue to try and support them as best as we can and as they need.
Brilliant. And I'm going to put you on the spot now, Fiona, and can answer this how you feel. Obviously, we've looked back a lot, and we're coming to the end of 2020. What does 2021 look like from your perspective?
Yikes. I think I hope we get to a point in 2021 where we are seeing a lot more face-to-face interaction with one another in the office, that there are people, back in the new world, be it 3 days, 4 days a week, working from the office and then having that flexibility at home. I think in my own head, I've certainly written off between now and the end of March in terms of getting most people back. I think that's not going to happen. But I would like to think that by the time we get to 2021, that we will be seeing a lot more of one another in person. I would like that we would be back traveling a bit, but I suppose that's all very much dependent on the vaccine and how different countries are managing it. I'd like to go on my own holiday if that was possible.
Don't we all?
I wouldn't mind a little bit of sun. And then leaving out the kind of COVID side of it, I'd like to think that by the time we reach this time next year, that we will have, challenged ourselves to rethink on how we do things, how we manage, how we run an office, how we engage with clients, how we train our graduates, how we train our newly qualifieds, that we will have challenged ourselves to think outside the box and come up with new ways of being as effective in people development and people management. We've kept the client service side on the road, but team development is something that's very close to my heart. Doing right by a newly qualified, doing right by a graduate. I've been very fortunate in my own career to have worked very closely with some really inspirational people who have invested heavily in me, and it's incumbent on me and my management team to invest heavily in our newly qualifieds or graduates or new people at whatever level they're at. I think we all need to rethink how we do that and challenge the norms that we grew up with, because we trained and worked and learned how to manage in a full-time office environment. That is gone now. So I know from recently chatting to partners in top 10 accounting firms, that's something that they're all thinking about. How do we create the same caliber of trainee or newly qualified, given that everything has changed? And I think I would like to know that in my own role and in my own senior team's role, that we've cracked that a lot more in 2021. I think we owe it to our teams to do that.
It's a question a lot of businesses, I think, are going to have to take a look at and come up with the answers. And maybe this time next year, Fiona, we can invite you back onto Conversations with Coopman, and we can see how you went about that and see how it all worked out. Look, thank you so much for taking the time again to speak to us. It sounds like yourself and the team at Walkers are meeting the challenges that we're facing head on, obviously with a lot of innovation and commitment, and it seems that your team are well positioned to come out of this positively. So we wish you all the best for the remainder of this year and going into next year. And thank you ever so much for your insights into business and what's going on with yourselves.
Thanks, Fiona. All the best.
Thanks.
Thanks for joining us on Conversations with Coopman. If you are looking to hire excellent talent or considering your next career move in front office, risk, compliance, or accounting, please reach out to a member of our specialist recruitment team. If you have any questions about the financial services market, feel free to leave a comment below and we will get back to you soon. And if you like this podcast episode, we'd greatly appreciate a video like, or even better, subscribe to our channel to stay up to date with our latest releases.